And welcome back to iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Talon. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. In the PropTech hot seat today, I have Jeremy Heath-Smith, CEO of Spike Global, and Susan Barrett, Spike Global's rep in the Irish market. Jeremy and Susan, you're both very welcome. Tell me about Spike Global.
Thank you, and good morning. I think probably I'll take that question, seeing as I created Spike 10 years ago. So Spike was founded out of my background is from the video games world, which doesn't sound particularly prop techy at all, and I'll explain where the connections kind of meet. But I created Spike about 10 years ago after a fortuitous meeting with an old friend of mine who worked for a company that just acquired Battersea Power Station. And we were actually on a stag weekend sailing in the Solent. And he said to me, well, we just bought Battersea Power Station, as you do. And he said, but I want to create a community within there. And then he asked me what I was doing. And I'd just come out of being in the video games world and was looking at what mobile was going to do. And 10 years ago, the iPad was 2 years old. The iPhone was 4 years old, maybe 3 years old. It was very early days. But it was obvious that those mediums were going to be used in a far greater way than they were currently being used going back 10 years. So he said, why don't you have a look at it and see what you think you can create for 4,000 apartments and retail and a community within that space. So about 8 years ago, we set out, we created a scope document, and Spike was born really as a community tenant engagement portal. And going back that time, there was nothing available. The only things that were available were some hotel software. I think Ask Arthur had some sort of ties to it, but there was nothing that wanted to engage the resident. And I think that when you look back in the age of history and you start looking at what had big impacts on how consumers were, because it's all about the consumer. It's not about the tech. It's about the consumer. And consumers' position in society changed with products like TripAdvisor. So suddenly they could go to a restaurant, have a bad meal, come outside and go, that restaurant's dreadful. They could also buy an apartment and say, don't buy an apartment from these builders because they build a terrible apartment. You could buy a car. The shift changed to the power of the consumer. So Spike was then looking at this from a consumer standpoint and saying, what does the consumer actually want? How do we treat a consumer? The consumer being the resident, obviously. And the key thing to all of this is communication. So how do you communicate efficiently backwards and forwards between the building operator, the builder, the office manager, doesn't matter who it is, just the communication channels. And you asked me about, I said about the video games experience. The one thing that made our video games successful is it has to be a good game. If it's not a good game, it's not going to sell. And I know that sounds very obvious, but it's the same thing as with an app. If it's not usable and it's not easy, it gets pushed to the back of your phone and you never use it. So our emphasis has always been on the usability of the consumer to be able to get information very efficiently backwards and forwards. So that's how Spike was created. Wind the clock forward, sort of 8 years down the line, we now have 75 clients. We're in 130 buildings. We've got just north of a couple of 100,000 users, and our software has an incredible uptake. It's used 85% of our users use our software more than once a week. So it's a really important part of social dynamics living in the current world that we live. So that's where we came from.
That's a really interesting summary of it, because I'm not at all surprised to know there's an overlap between the games industry and PropTech, because actually anybody involved in the immersive technology space, most of them have come from a gaming background. And actually what we're seeing at the moment, from local authority level right through to private endeavors, that gamification is a huge part of that. I mean, you say a game has to be good for it to sell, which sounds basic, but I think if we break down what good means, you're probably talking about something that's gamified to the point of being compelling that it has people returning. So there's some stickiness around it. So actually, so from that point of view, I would say that's a skill set that was never in the used in the built environment, but actually very good for consumers that it is being used today. So that's one of the things that makes me very excited about PropTech. But in terms of tenant engagement, you know, one of the things we know, so for example, if we were looking at developing an app, one of the first things that, you know, we know is that actually people will download an app, but they won't keep an app on their phone unless they're really getting value for it. So, you know, I in one way, I think you touched on it there. It's not about the technology, it is about the user experience. And in this way, I think the UK market is so far ahead of the Irish market in terms of not just understanding the importance from a reputational point of view and the commercial imperative of good relations with tenants. In Ireland, we just didn't have a mature built to rent sector. I mean, we still don't. It's still unfolding. So there hasn't been the same approach to caring for tenants, because tenants were seen as very transigent, short term. You didn't really have to keep them happy. They'd rent wherever was available, you know, for a year and move on. And that couldn't be further from the truth now. So can you maybe help us in Ireland learn from some of the experiences over the past decade in terms of tenant engagement? So because our build to rent sector is so new, Joan, do you have stats in terms of how long tenants are likely to stay? Because, you know, you mentioned there are 75 clients across 130 buildings. So do you have good data in terms of how long tenants stay in the buildings that you're involved in?
The simple answer to that is yes, we do. And the differential between the Irish market and the UK market, you summed it up beautifully. Is you're just slightly behind, and it's only slightly behind. It's not because there's not a will. There's definitely a will. I think your market, your domestic market, has been so prolifically oversubscribed by people wanting apartments. It's actually, as you said, been a case that we'll come back to that. We're not too worried about that. Well, that all changes. You know, life does change, and markets slow down, and more buildings get built, and supply and demand. And I think, you know, with bringing Susan on board, is exactly her enthusiasm and knowledge, local knowledge, is exactly for that. Susan has to do an awful lot of leading people down the path of this is what is going to happen. This is where we see the market, and this is what's happening in the UK. As regards to the data itself, we obviously see usage, as I explained to you before. You know, don't forget our software has two parts. We have the kind of the ability to do deliveries, report defects, to communicate, all of that sort of stuff you need to do to be in a building. But we also have the community aspect to our software as well, which is bringing people together, the social, the ability to create clubs, the ability to talk in forums, the ability to actually turn around and say, I will give you an example. We had one of our clients, one of the tenants, complained the swimming pool was too cold, and I realized that's a real first world problem here. But they put it out there onto the forum. And the beauty of openness, and it is, you know, this is where it all works, is that the managing agent was able to go back and say, well, we hear what you're saying. We've spoken to the Swimming Pool Association, and they tell us that it needs to be X, Y, Z degrees, and we've checked the temperature, and it's the correct temperature, so we're going to leave it as it is. That's dealt with. Now, in the past, that would happen was there could be WhatsApp groups or Twitter, or where people have moaned about the temperature of the swimming pool, and that it just escalates. These things escalate unless they're dealt with. So our software creates an environment where tenants stay longer. And equally, we have examples, and multiple examples, of tenants moving into some of these schemes where they rent, and then they've ended up buying an apartment in the scheme. And I would love to say it's because of us. Of course, we can't take full credit, but they are part of a community. They've got friends suddenly, and they're part of a book club, and they're in a running club and a jogging club, and they can meet their friends on the on-site facilities, maybe book out the cinema room, or meet in the private dining areas. All of those things create this mini micro communities. Very important.
Yeah, I mean, the community is the huge driver. Susan, I might bring you in here because I think that, there are differences that even I'm aware of between the English and the Irish markets. But one of those is certainly around the perception of tenants and from tenants themselves. So, for example, very few people would have chosen to be tenants long term. They are generally there as a stopgap until they move on to the next level. So Susan, just because you're familiar with the work in the UK, what's your take on the Irish marketplace where it is at the moment?
Well, obviously, just going back to what you said there, Carol, that the tradition, Ireland has a long tradition of home ownership, and the prospect and the idea of renting long term has not been in the Irish psyche. However, it is now. And given the shortage of housing that we're experiencing over the last 10 years, it's become a very important sector. And, to make people more comfortable, to allow them to be involved and I suppose have a certain sense of control over their own living conditions, it's very, very important that they're engaged in their own environment and their own living space.
I think it's interesting when you use the word control, because we know at the moment the Irish rental market is so broken in Ireland and there's such a mismatch of supply and demand. Affordability has just gone completely out the window. You use the word control, but we know that the marketplace for Irish tenants or for tenants in Ireland at the moment is one that's very disempowering as opposed to control. So for the developments that you're looking at in Ireland, what kind of strategies are going to be employed to build that community?
So amenities are a great attraction, obviously. However, people are people at the end of the day, and what people want is connection with other people. They want connection with their local communities. They want connection with their environment. And I use the word control there, but I suppose it's a sense of ownership over their living environment the people are looking for. And this, as I said, and we all know, is relatively new in the Irish market, but it is being very much recognised, and the importance of same being very much recognised. So it all comes back down to community connection, and that stems from tenant engagement.
Can you give me some examples of some of the things that maybe for the Irish properties, is it a case of clubs? Is it events? How important is it that you're getting people together in person, particularly now post-COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. Post-COVID, people are looking for a safer way to communicate, a safer connection, and I suppose the building of forums within the app, etc. They allow people that safe connection. Then they can meet in person, and it evolves from there, basically.
I'm not sure, Jeremy, if this is a question for you, or Susan, if this is a question for you, but it's something that I'm interested in. Given that build to rent in Ireland is really an emerging sector, and a very important emerging sector. In fact, it's where a huge chunk of delivery is coming from right now, very important delivery for the rental market, particularly at a time when we know the traditional small landlords are leaving in droves because of our uncertain and inconsistent and ad hoc policy making that's, very pro-tenant, but not just pro-tenant, it's actually quite anti-landlord as well. So from that point of view, this is a sector that is going to become much more important to Irish people. Do the developers of these schemes, do they have an obligation to think about the wider community when building developments?
No question. And as much as Susan is more than capable of answering this as well, we work with all the schemes that we're talking to and working with. This is a big part of their strategy. It has to be. Developers have buried their head in the sand for too many years, and they've batted this kind of idea away for too long. They now realise that it's very important. And I think what's really interesting, and I certainly don't want to or pretend to understand the Irish policies on development. We have a client called Niche Living, who are about to launch their first co-living development in Ireland, and that from a scheme has embedded community as a key part of what they see to the strength of co-living within the Irish market. So we see co-living as a stepping stone. So our business We deal with students, and students now live in these beautiful student build properties which are gorgeous. They come out of there. When I was a student, I lived in a horrible little bedsit and left there and went into another horrible little bedsit. That's all there was available. But they're not going to come out of these gorgeous student buildings that have been built and then go in a little bedsit. They're going to want to go into a lovely build-to-rent scheme or a co-living scheme, because the build-to-rent schemes might be 1 step 2 away. So we're big believers in the build-to-rent. We've got a number of clients the co-living. We have a number of co-living clients actually around the world now, in Germany and in the UK, and we see that as a tremendous stepping stone. I realise it's in Ireland. They've got some quirky laws that they've brought in.
Yeah, they have, but the actually in Ireland, what we're seeing is people are paying the price. I don't like the term property ladder, but the reality is it is a ladder, and the importance of any ladder is that there has to be a rung that is low enough for people to stand on. And unfortunately, in Ireland, over the last decade, we've abolished bedsits, and there's an element of kind of perfect being the enemy of done. So now suddenly we have, but affordability has to be a big part of that. And I think that's where the criticism of co-living in Ireland as it is rolled out. Now, I believe that if co-living had been allowed, that we would have had people coming in to fill the lower rungs of the ladder, essentially. So at the moment, all we saw with the premium offerings and the affordability there was the contentious issue. But actually, I do believe that we can't take away those bottom rungs of the ladder for people, because otherwise they can't even get on it. And that's where we have 27-year-olds living at home. This kind of nonsense. So
I think,
yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. And I think what you've also got to remember about our software, we've been talking about these high-end luxury developments, which are amazing. But as you rightfully pointed out, they're expensive. These things don't come lightly. Our software, we have clients that are down at the lower end of that scale, particularly in the UK. We have a lovely client called Get Living, and they are you have to fit a certain criteria to buy one of their apartments, and it's designed for young professionals, kind of nurses, junior doctors, people starting out, as you just rightfully said, and they're beautiful. Now, these are smaller schemes of maybe 20, 30 apartments, and we were always asked, well, will your software work in a scheme like that? Why do we need that? Well, let me tell you, as an uptake, we get 100% usage from those smaller schemes. And whilst they're not booking amazing facilities like a cinema or a private gym and all that, what they do is create these community hubs. And what they also love is the ability to be able to communicate back to the developer who's managing the scheme and tell them what they need to, that the front door's broken and that's the key, communication.
Yeah. Look, I think, I know there's so much more that we could explore on this, particularly around maybe the maintenance or fault reporting and all of these other elements. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into it today,
Sure.
but the reality is in Ireland, certainly the tenant engagement conversation is really only kicking off. There are very few providers in the marketplace. And I think that there's probably going to be a certain element of figuring out what needs to happen for the Irish market, because one thing we saw with early schemes is that there was almost this assumption that it would be yoga classes at lunchtime or barbecues on the rooftop, and that wasn't the reality. That wasn't what people wanted and needed. So there's a case of really having to learn as we go and figure out what the next generation wants out of living. But it's a really interesting time for this, and I appreciate you both joining me today. Apologies that we don't have time maybe to go into some of the finer details and some of the additional offerings of your platform, but just where can people go to find out information about your platform and for the Irish market?
Well, they can contact me directly, Carol, and they can contact Spike, obviously, but I'm available to meet anybody at all here, and I have obviously met loads of people, but equally, as I said, they can contact Spike directly.
Fantastic.
SpikeGlobal.com is a good starting point.
Absolutely.
Super. That's it. Thank you so much. That was Jeremy Heath-Smith of Spike Global and Susan Barrett, who is the Irish rep for Spike Global. And that's it from us this week. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. My thanks to the Hear Me Roar production team and to Luke Delaney on sound for Dublin South FM. Until next time, thank you for listening.